Try and picture the scene. Light is streaming in through large, closely spaced windows adorned with fabric blinds that hang awkwardly from their fittings. Particles float through the beams and give the room a dirty, tired atmosphere, and the air is thick with a stale, wooden smell. Faded scratches and chalk-like blots on the floorboards are testimony to years of stools being dragged forward and back. In places, the floor even sags under the weight of looms spaced evenly around the room, between which an older woman moves, fussing over the machines. In the corner, a man, smartly dressed, who hasn't even noticed the group of young women milling around the doorway with no idea what to do. This is the sight that likely greeted Gunta Stölzl when she arrived at the Bauhaus in Weimar in 1919. Upon stepping into the hazy weaving workshop and seeing the confused glances of the other women, she could have been forgiven for despairing. For students attracted to the school by the promise of artistic freedom, the studio and its atmosphere of apathy were an insult, intended not as an opportunity, but as a prison. In 1919, Walter Gropius opened the doors of the Bauhaus with the declaration that the school would admit any person of good repute, regardless of sex. There are no differences between the fairer sex and the stronger sex. At a time when schools were segregated by gender and women were regularly denied access to academic and artistic tutelage, even that choice of words presented a strong allure. Indeed, it was stronger than Gropius and his Council of Masters anticipated. By the time the school opened its doors officially, his founding announcement had attracted more female students than male, and as integrated foundation courses commenced, Stölzl and the other female Bauhausler must have revelled in the freedom afforded to them by an institution that ostensibly found little value in labels of sex and gender. But the minutes from the Masters' meetings revealed that the male leaders of the Bauhaus were growing steadily more concerned with the number of women filtering into the school. Gropius in particular was worried that the presence of so many would give the institution an amateur affectation. He didn't believe women were up to the academic rigours of the Bauhaus and, according to Gropius, were thus a liability to the artistic direction of the school because women simply weren't capable of thinking beyond two dimensions. I mean, come on! He determined that in order to preserve the craft of the Bauhaus, its women would be kept from the principal subjects of study and herded into a single insignificant workshop from where they wouldn't be able to dilute the school's focus on architecture. Now, it's important to note that this decision wasn't solely that of Walter Gropius. His Council of Masters were also involved, among whom were the likes of Johannes Itten, who we will touch upon in the next video, and Lionel Feininger. But as the founder of the school and ultimate arbiter of school policy, it is only right that we hold Gropius in particular to account in this matter. That the workshop he dropped the women into was weaving was instructive of the prevailing attitude that weaving was women's work, something that could be mastered without significant effort or intelligence. Oskar Schlemmer summed up how many male masters at the Bauhaus regarded the topic when he said, "Where there is wool, there is a woman who weaves, if only to pass the time." It is a dismissive statement in which weaving is declared little more than a hobby. A major concern of the early Bauhaus was the differentiation between art and craft, and this distinction too was gendered. Gropius elevated the latter, associating it with architecture and sculpture and, more pointedly, male genius, supposing the former required less skill and intellect. In short, art, a category to which weaving supposedly belonged, was a decorative, often feminine practice. This arbitrary philosophical classification of the arts within the Bauhaus may have been why the Bauhaus's first master of weaving, who, in another demonstration of the apathy with which Gropius regarded weaving, refused to engage with the subject, vowing never to weave a single thread, tie a single knot, or make a single textile design. Weaving was regarded as a manual rather than intellectual subject, subordinate to all other practices at the Bauhaus, and in that it was the perfect place for Gropius to dump his female students, convinced as he was that they weren't capable of craft, able only to indulge in mere art. At first, women were strongly urged to enter the workshop, though this was tantamount to a directive. Later, they were bluntly refused entry to any other course. No girls allowed. But the masters underestimated how much the weaving workshop would come to be defined by the women within it, and how much the school would come to rely on them. What none of these men were prepared for was Gunta Stölzl. Stölzl was a Red Cross nurse during the First World War, and we can learn much from reports on her time on the Eastern Front. Her daughter, Monika Stadler, relates this story from her nursing days.
She was a rebel already then, rebelling against procedures that were not in the interest of patients and doctors that operated carelessly on her patients. One doctor was sent away because of her complaints. The nurse here on the left is Gunther Stölzl. You see her posture? That's the nurse as a careless surgeon you had to watch out for.
Even before the Bauhaus, Stölzl was a forthright and imposing woman, keenly aware of the needs of those under her care and indefatigable in their defence. Once she arrived at the weaving workshop, Stölzl was appalled by its state, and despite the presence of two, albeit ineffective, tutors, she immediately took over as de facto leader of the department. Though not officially appointed until 1922, she took to writing Meister on her identification card in pen to make that position completely unambiguous. As Stadler relates, Stölzl had studied a range of subjects at Munich School of Applied Arts and was able to provide much to the women of the weaving workshop, and not just limited to design, offering a range of courses including maths and business studies.
She had done 3 different studies before she came to the Bauhaus. I think it is often overlooked how well trained many of these first-generation Bauhausers were when they arrived at the Bauhaus. In other words, those wonderful products of the early Bauhaus were not only the result of the teachings of the famous masters.
In truth, Gropius's attempts to keep women from the Bauhaus's masculine art suited Stölzl. With the help of women such as Marianne Brandt, Annie Albers and Benita Otte, she used this policy of segregation to create an environment of experimentation free from male oversight, a state of affairs hitherto unknown to the women of the Bauhaus. Some have argued that Stölzl's tacit acceptance of the Bauhaus's division was the result of internalised sexism. Anja Baumhoff in particular suggests that a precondition of her employment in the weaving workshop was her willingness to accept gender ideology. However, others have regarded this as Stölzl cannily gaming the system. In creating a wholly female space, Stölzl was able to then capitalise on a mostly female customer base to which the rest of the Bauhaus wasn't appealing. Ty Smith states, if she had internalised the sexism of the masters, it was not just in the organisation of the Bauhaus women's class, but in her view of and appeal to the workshop's female buyers. In the hands of a man, such a strategy would simply be branded by historians as good marketing. This business acumen made the workshop the most consistently lucrative of the Bauhaus. Throughout its early years, but especially between 1923 and 1926, the school struggled financially as Walter Gropius persisted in trying to turn the Bauhaus into a functioning architecture studio. And whenever the school found itself in trouble, it always seemed to be the weavers who kept it afloat. At a 1922 exhibition in Zurich, they sold more products than any other workshop, and following another in 1923, it was noted that the weavers were particularly quick off the mark in finding representatives to handle its retailing after it received an impressive number of commissions. Gropius may have perceived weaving as the nadir of the Bauhaus, but Stölzl had turned it into an indispensable financial backbone of the school. Despite this, Stölzl wasn't officially made a master until 1927. Unfortunately, by 1930, the intense nationalism that had been sweeping Germany for almost a decade finally erupted. In the midst of immense political pressure, and after finding a swastika painted on her door, Stölzl, who was then married to a Jewish man, resigned. A lack of support from then-director Mies van der Rohe in the face of the anti-Semitism engulfing the school infuriated her students, and much as politics would lead to the closure of the Bauhaus 3 years later, the rising civil fervour engulfing the country made Stölzl's position untenable. What are you doing? What are you doing? Are you being shit?
At the Bauhaus, she would say, you know, for us, the most important thing was life. And then she would go on reminiscing and probably romanticizing life a little bit at the Bauhaus. But she never idealized the Bauhaus. She had been there from the beginning, 1919, until 1931, a long time. And she had experienced all the personal differences, the differences in ideals, and she realized very well that the Bauhaus had not always lived up to its ideals.
Like so many of the female Bauhausler, Stölzl's legacy expanded dramatically once she left the school. Her pedagogical essays, along with the writings of Annie Albers, have helped define the theory of weaving and are still used in teaching the subject today. She was the first woman to exhibit textiles at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and is recognised the world over as a pioneer of textile design. Gropius's Bauhaus made wonderful things, objects that have been caught in time as symbols of what the Bauhaus really meant. But in terms of a general legacy, the school seems to have been caught up in its dedication to anonymity, and so much of what we do see, what we do remember of the Bauhaus, is down to its female students. Compared to Stotzel, the work of Walter Gropius is somewhat absent from our collective consciousness. Where Gropius is synonymous with the institution he founded, the women of the Bauhaus managed to transcend the school's ambiguity and flourish under their own names, all this in spite of the obstacles planted before them by supposedly great men. The women of the Bauhaus left behind a catalogue of innovative and exciting work that is still in circulation today. The patterns and materials developed both inside and beyond the walls of the school still permeate the modern market, and their work still resonates with the contemporary study of weaving and textiles. 100 years on from the opening of the Bauhaus, Gropius has become even more conflated with the school he built. As his anonymity grows, and as we examine further the contradictions upon which he founded the Bauhaus, it seems fitting that it is the women he worked so hard to suppress, to whom he lied, and against whom he held such bizarre and damaging prejudices, who are now the Bauhaus's most visible and influential figures. And as the immediacy of Walter Gropius wilts and fades, it is the very tangible legacy of the women he sought to stifle that has grown in its place.